The West is getting kicked out of Africa. The changing dynamics, the West's decline and Africa's rising independence. The dynamics between the West and Africa are undergoing a significant transformation, with several African nations expressing their desire for autonomy and economic independence. Historically, France, the UK, and the US have wielded considerable influence in Africa, but their actions have often been criticized for exploitation and arrogance. This essay will delve into the reasons behind Africa's push for sovereignty, focusing on France's controversial practices and the potential consequences for Western nations. Economic machinations. The West's historical economic exploitation in Africa follows a Machiavellian playbook, ensuring dependency for its own gains. Manipulative trade practices and resource extraction maintain a delicate balance, keeping African nations economically subservient. Neocolonial calculations. The legacy of colonialism, cleverly sustained through neocolonial tactics, enables Western powers to exert control without the overt use of force. This calculated approach allows the West to secure its interests while maintaining a facade of cooperation and partnership. Economic exploitation. France, the UK, and the US have faced accusations of economic exploitation in Africa, maintaining a system that perpetuates poverty. Exploitative trade practices and resource extraction have fueled economic imbalances and hindered Africa's development. Neocolonialism. The legacy of colonialism has persisted through neocolonial practices, wherein Western powers have continued to exert control indirectly. This has manifested in economic policies, trade agreements, and political interventions that favor Western interests over African development. France's controversial practices. Racketeering through the CFA franc. France's control over the CFA franc, a currency used by many African nations, has been a contentious issue. Accusations suggest that France extracts exorbitant amounts, estimated at $500 billion annually, through this monetary system, leading to economic dependence. Impact on French economy. The potential withdrawal of African revenue could have severe consequences for France's economy. France's heavy reliance on African resources has raised concerns about its economic stability, potentially leading to a downgrade to a third-world status. Political implications. The economic shift could result in political changes within France, with the loss of influence and resources from Africa affecting its global standing. The transition might pave the way for emerging powers, like Russia, to strengthen their ties with African nations. The West's decline in Africa creates opportunities for Machiavellian realignment on the global chessboard. Emerging powers, particularly Russia, can exploit the power vacuum left by the West's waning influence, forging strategic alliances with African nations seeking alternatives. African independence and Machiavellian realism. Calculated revolt. The delayed revolt against the West indicates a Machiavellian awareness among African nations, carefully calculating the optimal time to break free from historical shackles. This calculated move allows African countries to assert their independence without risking overwhelming retaliation. African independence and global realignment. Emerging alliances. The desire for autonomy has led African nations to seek new alliances and partnerships beyond the traditional Western powers. Russia, with its growing global influence, is positioned to forge stronger ties with African nations seeking alternatives. Revolt and independence. The delayed revolt against Western dominance reflects a growing awareness and determination among African nations to break free from historical constraints. African countries are asserting their independence, both economically and politically, challenging the established order. Conclusion. The West's declining influence in Africa signals a paradigm shift in global dynamics. France, the UK, and the US are facing the consequences of historical exploitation, with African nations striving for autonomy and economic independence. France's controversial practices, particularly through the CFA franc, have led to a potential economic downturn and a re-evaluation of its global standing. As African nations seek new alliances, including with emerging powers like Russia, the geopolitical landscape is undergoing a significant realignment. The West must adapt to these changes and engage with Africa on more equitable terms to foster mutually beneficial relationships in the future. The West's decline in Africa unfolds as a consequence of its own cunning maneuvers. France's exploitation through the CFA franc, coupled with the strategic miscalculations of the West, has paved the way for a recalibration of power dynamics. As African nations play their Machiavellian cards with calculated precision, the West must reassess its strategies to navigate the evolving geopolitical landscape, acknowledging that power dynamics are never static and adaptability is the key to survival in the game of global politics.